So I'm attempting this again. This this has got to be the. I think we've done a few podcasts so far. The last recording we did, we still haven't been able to post up yet. That was, of course, the full length animated GI Joe. The animated film commentary with my buddies Toby and Gypsy, which I still haven't been able to post simply because I'm pretty sure Hasbro's gonna sue me because the audio from the film is completely through the podcast. So you're hearing an audio commentary with my friends, which is great, but it's a little too much of the film for us to post it. And unfortunately, you really can't cut that up because it's just too good. See, I'm doing it again. I'm doing it again. I've got the guest on the line. I'm already babbling. Um, we still haven't even figured out the name of the show yet. I am tempted. I can't say this show stinks because I think has that as far as his email address. So I'm still going to go with the Nick Saveri show because I do have the URL from GoDaddy. I haven't done anything with it yet, but eventually the shows will go up there. This one, of course, will be featured on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/NPZ1978. And the topic of this show and going forward, hopefully for the rest of the season, although there will be some scheduling notes at the end of the program, is about something near and dear to my heart and near and dear to the heart of the wonderful gentleman I have on the phone with me today, which of course is the Oakland Raiders. And it's a difficult subject, and it's actually an interesting time to talk about because the first thing we're going to get into is not necessarily Raider football. It's not even football, period. It's actually getting into baseball. So I have on the phone with me, that's a horrible tease. I have with me through the phone a wow. I've known Mike. I've known you since, let's see. Well, I was a year or two before you in college at Rutgers. And of course, yes, we are both Scarlet Knights. And one day we may have to do a podcast on that. And Leon will totally run with its show because he is an expert in all things Rutgers. But Mike, we have been friends probably since I want to say 98 or 90 and 99 because I remember we met at that student activities thing that Harbacken had put together. But
That's correct. Yeah, Livingston College.
that's right, Livingston College. So without further ado, I have on the phone with me a a sports nut, but also an employee in the sports world who, Mike, I'm going to let you speak your resume first. So, folks, Mike Leon on the phone. Mike, of course, since you are a guest, take a moment to plug. Do you have a Twitter handle? Is there a way you want people to try to touch base with you?
Thanks, Nick. Yes, lifelong Scarlet Knight fan and alumni, class of 2004, journalism school of communications there. The Twitter handle is at EAKIDLEON, sticking true to my Bronx roots as the Kid Leon. And obviously on I don't know the actual Facebook page where people can find, but I have been writing blogs in the sports industry for MarlinsNation.com. Also worked for ESPN for a couple of years there, and also worked for SportsNetwork.com as a sports trainer back in 2002, 2003, covering the Philadelphia Sixers, also the Eagles, the Flyers, and the Phillies, all the Philadelphia major sports teams. So a bunch of years in the sports industry, and like Nick said, sports nut, and of course we share a common bond being not only Rutgers grad, but fans of the only nation in sports that actually matters, Raider Nation.
And with that cue, we're going to talk about a smaller nation, of course, which is Marlins Nation. Mike, within the last couple of days, you have gone through the equivalent of what I best would consider sports Armageddon in light of the recent trades that the Marlins have done, which important to note is not the first time this year they've jumped ship essentially with salaries and trades. So, Mike, take me to Miami. It is Tuesday afternoon at around 4:30, 5 o'clock. The reports are starting to come in about the trades. How did you hear about it? Who did you start talking to? And what was the reaction of people around you? Folks, quick note, and this is totally on me. Mike Leon, of course, is a resident of the FLA. He is indeed a resident in Florida, specifically in Miami. Sadly, we did not get a chance to hook up on South Beach, but that will be rectified eventually when I do get back to the MIA, which I surprisingly fell in love with. and totally understand why LeBron made the decision, because I will one day make the decision myself. So, Mike, take me back to this Tuesday at around 5 o'clock.
Well, I'll tell you what, and LeBron checking his payroll stuff every week, noticing no state tax, that's another huge reason why he's here, but I digress. Well, actually, it's funny, I was in a meeting, and it was about 5 o'clock, and I came back to my cell phone to about 6 text messages from the other 6 Marlins fans that reside in the area. And also, I should preface with, I'm a season ticket holder. I have a couple friends that work within the organization, and some of them actually work with season ticketing. So I was able to get a deal on tickets, and who wouldn't want to get, tickets when they had just spent all this money on adding some pieces to the team like Jose Reyes, Mark Burley, and Josh Johnson, who are all involved in this trade. So I get this text message from some friends saying, hey, have you seen this trade? Did you see this? Well, finally started to delve into it a little bit. And once you start to actually go into the core of the trade, the Marlins essentially got rid of any pieces remaining from a team that won 69 games. That's what it looks like on the surface. But when you factor in the whole, which is from December of 2011, when they started to make these free agent splashes and added Jose Reyes for 6 years, $106 million, added Keith Bell for 3 years, $27 million, added Mark Burley for 4 years, $54 million. And then you factor in that they already had Josh Johnson locked up for a couple more years. Ricky Velasco's checking in at $9 million a year himself. Hanley Ramirez was still on the team at that point, factoring in at $11 million a year. When you have all these names and you start to see the team gel for a couple of months, but management in July kind of pulled the rug under everybody. And they started to trade Hanley Ramirez to the Dodgers for Nathan Eovaldi. And the Dodgers ate most of that salary. And you saw little glimpses. All of a sudden, Anibal Sanchez and Omar Infante shipped to Detroit for a package of prospects and shaving the Marlins $14 million just on that deal alone. And people took it as, well, this is a good baseball move. Both those guys are free agents. Hanley was a little bit of a clubhouse distraction and wasn't producing like Hanley of 2010, 2009. And now, with this mega trade, it's kind of been the last straw for a fan base that in South Florida fans will admit themselves, they are an event town. If you're winning, it's an event and people want to go. But when you're not, things happen like no sellouts, empty seats. The Heat have had problems selling tickets in the past, having worked in that organization in ticket sales myself. I know some of the promotions that they've done just to get people there, and they have arguably 3 of the best 15 players in the NBA on their roster. So the Marlins pulling this stunt and trading everybody to the Blue Jays that was left of contractual value and of talent, it's not a shocker given the way the organization is operated, but it's a pretty big move down here, and there's a lot of public outrage. I'm sure you've seen the letter that the mayor of Miami sent to Bud Selig earlier, I believe it was Wednesday, and he was asking Bud Selig to review the trade and to not allow it to go through because of the fact that it would put the stadium at risk with the public money and no one going to games anymore and boycotting the team essentially. So it's caused quite a stir down here.
Well, and that's where I'll jump in. The 2 things you brought up is, of course, the mayor taking action, or at least trying to. And one thing I think about then is the role of the sports commissioner. The most recent action I can think of a commissioner taking in recent memory, or at least within the last couple of years, where it was very much apparent this is the boss, this is the guy in the sport that makes all these critical decisions, aside from Bountygate and all the nonsense that Goodell gets wrapped up into, is probably Stern from the NBA's shooting down of the Chris Paul trade, which to Laker fans and to many fans seemed like a very egregious exercise in control from a commissioner's office. So, Mike, the question I come back to you with is, does a commissioner have the right then to shoot down this trade, which by all measures is essentially a salary dump for the Miami Marlins?
Well, the problem is there hasn't been precedent in baseball for a long time in terms of an ownership group like the Marlins selling off players. Remember, we just talked about the last time they made mega trades, this actual ownership brass of the Marlins, they've been owning the team since 2002, was in 2006 when they traded away Miguel Cabrera and Josh Beckett and Carlos Delgado. So they did have a track record, but what the team used to point to back then was, well, we play in a football stadium and our revenue streams don't match. Now, for it to happen on the eve of 1 year anniversary of the stadium actually, having a game being played inside and being open for people to walk around and see, it's the commissioner has a clause in his deal in the collective bargaining agreement where he can invoke, the clause where he, in essence, acts in the best interest of the game. But this is not applicable there because what the commissioner would have to do is prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, some type of sabotage by the ownership group. And Commissioner Felix said earlier today that he's talked to several independent scouts that actually feel the Marlins made out in this trade. The package of prospects that they got, while the Blue Jays did not surrender their top two prospects in this deal, they feel that the package of prospects they got, plus the two major league ready players with Yunel Escobar and Jeff Mathis, who are already major leaguers, they feel there's enough compensation. The problem is where you could get into a tricky situation is the contracts themselves, because the Marlins are shedding $160 million almost in payroll because of the backloaded nature of, the Burley and Reyes deal. Reyes still has 5 years, $80 million left on his deal. Burley still has 3 years and $40 million left on his deal. And so those numbers matching up, the commissioner can look just the last year when the Red Sox did it with the Dodgers and traded away Adrian Gonzalez and Josh Beckett. But I fully expect the commissioner to review it, but half-heartedly and pass it through. And the other sticking point to this is, and I just found out this earlier today, Jose Reyes is actually on vacation in Dubai, and that's the reason why the trade hasn't been made official yet and can't be announced until he comes back and takes his physical with Toronto.
I think part of the anger for Marlins fans has to be that historically, this isn't the first time this franchise pulled this stunt. This isn't the first time that the Florida Marlins basically go from... Now, I guess the only exception is that they're not going from an area, a season where you won so many games, dump salary, and then drop off. This isn't going from, for example, 97 to 98. In 97, Marlins win 92 games. 92 and 70, win, of course, the World Series. 98, they drop down to 54 wins and 108 losses. Which, of course, that year, if you're comparing rosters, just to give you an example, in terms of the noticeable difference, back in 1997, you got starters of Charles Johnson at catcher, Luis Castillo at second base, a healthy Luis Castillo, much before the Mets got their hands on him. Edgar Renteria at shortstop.
Fly ball, Luis Castillo.
See, that's the New York fan in you talking. Bobby Bonilla at third base, Moises Alou in left field, Gary Sheffield starting. Take us to 98. I've got Greg Zahn at catcher. Derek Lee that year with a total OPS of 732. Craig Counsell, of course, later on to be the hero of the 2001 World Series. Edgar Renteria is still at shortstop, and I'm pretty sure he's playing shortstop somewhere because that man has indeed found the fountain of youth. Todd Zeile at third base, Cliff Floyd at left field, and Mark Kotsay at right field. So this noticeable drop-off in talent, which was in many ways a salary dump, and there were basically trades and guys opting out. But you then look at 2003 to 2004, where financially we went from Florida in their championship season goes with a payroll of $49 million in the year after $42 million. So not a noticeable drop-off. The 97 to 98 drop-off is significant, not just in wins, as we just talked about. 97, the payroll for the team was $52 million. 1998, you want to take a guess, Mike, at the payroll for the Florida Marlins in 1998?
If I remember correctly, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 million.
That's sad. That's sad that you know that from 1998. You may not remember the birthday of your children one day, but you are within $1 million of getting that number right. It was 19 million. It was $19 million for the '98 Florida Marlins team. 19.
Well, and to piggyback on that, the stark difference is, you got to remember, when the Marlins won the World Series in '03, now the Marlins have had three owners in their history. Huizenga was the original owner in '93, and he sold off the team in '99 to John Henry, who's the current owner of the Red Sox. And Henry only owned the team for a couple of years while he tried to get a stadium deal, but he couldn't get a stadium deal. And by the way, as we're talking, Leotis McKelvin takes a touchdown for the Bills to put them on the board 7-0. But that's another sport for another time. But in 2002, when Loria bought the team, he bought it for about $158 million. And he implored people that there's a need for a stadium in this city to have long-term stability for baseball. And '03 kind of gave him a little bit of credence because, Miguel Cabrera was a 21-year-old rookie at the time in that '03 season. He had Dontrelle Willis as a rookie at that time. So the organization had already, those are two original drafted Marlins. Actually, Dontrelle Willis came over from the Cubs organization, but through a trade. And Dombrowski from the '97 and '98 season, when he got rid of Devin Brown's, the Moises Alou contract, when he started shedding these contracts that Isaiah asked him to shed, he got back top flight prospects, number ones and number twos across the board. Derek Lee was San Diego's number one prospect at the time. Mark Kotsay was one of the top prospects in the game. So if people felt that while everyone knew Huizenga's intention was to start dumping salary, that wasn't a shock. The '05 to '06 Loria, when he got rid of Cabrera, Beckett, Delgado, that was more of a shock because of how it all happened within, I believe, about a month period. You would think the team would maybe 3 games, and maybe they got a little bit of juice, a good farm system, and then to wreck it. The problem that people are having with this fire sale, and I fall victim to it, because for years, as a fan of the organization, I've been telling.
We just lost Mike on the line, so we're gonna just call him back and let's see if we can get him back. You gotta love Sprint. You gotta love Sprint. So you have to forgive the ringing sounds in a minute. But hey, sorry about that. Yes, that's the clearly Sprint is not sponsoring this show, and I may not even take the money from Sprint to do this show. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty, so. But Mike, you were taking us through, it looked like 2005 to 2006 with Florida. And what's interesting is when you look at from 2005 to even now, from in that seven year span, most wins were 87 in 2009. 69 is their lowest win total, since the 2005 season. So they've always been hovering more or less within a 10 to 15 games. Actually, will have been an 11 game swing. Of mediocrity since Jeffrey Loria has purchased this team, which is also, I think, an argument against Loria's ownership of this franchise. Mike, the one thing I think about, though, is the team gets a stadium, publicly funded, takes all this money, goes through a season where they spend a ton of money on players, but also, and you were telling me this before we got on the air, about the entertainment value of this franchise in the sense of what the stadium was going to be used for, what was planned events that seemed to tell us that the stadium was the bigger feature than the ball club, which means then that this is an owner who's more worried about, or on the surface it looks to be more worried about bringing in revenue to justify the purchase of the stadium than he is of putting a quality baseball club on the field, which is obviously where the conflict with fans come from. We can relate to it to some extent in, up here close to Brooklyn with the Barclays Center, with Jay-Z having a couple of concerts to kick it off. I mean, Streisand's already been down here. So it's been a big venue already for that, in addition to having one of the college basketball conferences we'll be having there conference tournament at the Barclays Center. So Brooklyn Nets basketball is important, but it's not going to be necessarily what Bruce Ratner is only concerned about, or Jay-Z, or oh my goodness, I forgot the Nets owner. You're Prokhorov. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and to piggyback on that, see, the thing though, the stark difference between the Nets and the Marlins is basketball, you only have, 40 home games a year, whereas baseball, you have double that amount. And baseball obviously stretches for a longer period of time as it goes from April to October. And the Marlins, from day one, has tried to make this park, like I was telling you off air, has tried to make it more about the park as opposed to the team. And everyone fell for it because, like I was saying before the phone dropped off, I used to tell people the revenue streams don't match up for the Marlins. They're playing in a football stadium that they don't own, where they pay a hefty lease to the Miami Dolphins at the time, and they were doing a year-to-year lease with the owner of the Dolphins, Stephen Ross. And in addition to that, they made almost nothing on merchandising and game day concessions and parking, which the Marlins felt were integral revenue streams that you attain from hosting 81 games a year in your own park. So they had the city build 4 parking garages all adjacent to the stadium so they can generate extra revenue. And they insisted on the people that they would reinvest the money back into the team. And on the surface, everything looked fine, and especially in the winter meetings of last year, as you're seeing the Marlins in talks to sign this free agent, everyone was like, where's this money coming from? And then you have the justification by, hey, we're expecting to draw 3 million people. We're expecting 35,000 a night. The park holds 37. We're expecting not capacity, but at least 97%. And we're going to make this money, and we're going to be good and successful. And the funny part is they actually, in my opinion, spent the money wisely, but they overspent just to ensure they would get the player. For example, Jose Reyes last year, as a free agent, had only one choice, the Marlins. The Mets had already said they were not going to go out there and make an aggressive offer for him. Milwaukee was in play for him. But the highest offer they got, according to John Heyman and Ken Rosenthal, was anywhere in the ballpark of $70 to $80 million. And the Marlins, in essence, did against themselves, added an extra year, and gave him $106 million. Mark Burley was seen by Chicago as maybe a 2-year deal. The Marlins went out and gave a 4-year deal at $54 million backloaded. Heath Bell was 34 years old and out of shape, and was willing to give San Diego a hometown discount, but they already had a bullpen stock with Luke Gregerson and some of the other guys that they have already that they feel could jump into that role. So he was on his way out, and the Marlins, again, at that juncture, overbid for him and his services at $9 million a year. And we all know how that turned out with his 7 blown saves and his 6 ERA. So it's unfortunate because the precedent was set already the year before down here in a different sport. The Heat had signed everybody under contract. They added Mike Miller, which is not the big name, but they added Chris Bosh and LeBron James. And that team struggled in the initial parts of it, and everyone that has ever played sport at any level knows you have to have time to find your rhythm and chemistry. And the Marlins just never gave that team of last year, as constructed, a chance to survive. And, 11, 12 months later, it's blown up. And now, like I said, I'm one of the ones who do, because I'm a season ticket holder, and I've been going to games since their inception in '93. Haven't family that lived down here and always been going to games. And, it's a pretty sad day. And you hate to see some of these players go, especially Josh Johnson, who was an original Marlin and everyone loved, and Jose Reyes, who has a big Dominican following down here, and how close the Dominican Republic is, and how well he played in the second half of the year, and how we all thought with him and Stan going forward, you've got a decent nucleus, and now that's just not to be.
Sadly, with that, we actually hit 20, almost at 25 minutes talking about Armageddon, essentially, Miami. So, I guess Mike, going forward, and I can't believe I'm going to do this. I cannot believe I'm going to throw this out there because it sounds such like a teenager thing to do. But Mike, you wrote on Facebook. You see what I did? You see what I just did there? You wrote on Facebook about going back to your original fan or really original fandom for baseball. Are you seriously going to do that, or were you just venting frustration? And again, I can't believe I'm going off of a quote from social media, the worst social media being Facebook at this point.
Hey, if ESPN can quote Twitter athletes, like Herm Edwards told the rookies at the rookie symposium, don't hit send. Because when you hit send, we're going to get it, we're going to put it on the air. But my take is, I am not going to spend any more of the money that I've earned living in this city on that stadium. So I have actually convinced my current employers to pull their season tickets from the Marlins. We had 8 tickets in section 14, row 10, which are just behind home plate. And we had a one-time luxury suite that we would do, maybe once throughout the year. We did one last year, and it's kind of like, we have a little party there for some employees, and the suites hold about 20, 30 people. And so we've decided going forward that since the team's not going to be very good, and they've decided to kind of pull the rug from everybody, why continue to invest money? And as far as me going back to my original team as being from the Broncos, I stated earlier, and going back to the Yankees, I grew up as a Yankees fan. You have to remember the Marlins didn't come into existence until '93. By that time I was 13. Always going into games as a kid. My father looks like Reggie Jackson. Dave Winfield was a personal hero of mine growing up, and I got to meet him when I worked up at ESPN. And he was just a really good guy, and I've always been a Yankee fan my whole life. I'm a big Gary Sheffield fan, so I was very happy when he came to the Yankees. But I will root for them, but it won't be as hardcore as I would if the Marlins were doing something right. And at least with the Yankees, while they overspend at times to correct some of their mistakes, they've actually gotten back to some of their basics by drafting. And they drafted Jesus Montero, and I know they traded him, but they drafted Edwin Jackson. I know not Edwin Jackson, Austin Jackson, the center fielder. And I know they traded him, but they netted them Curtis Granderson. They started to build back up their farm system in addition to spending the money wisely in free agency. And it's because they have a good fan base, and the people trust that the ownership is going to do whatever it takes in their power to keep the team successful. Just like you saw today with the new general manager in Boston stating how they are going to spend wisely but field a competitive team. The distrust in South Florida is the reason why a lot of people don't think Loria and Sampson and Beinfest will actually do that and reinvest payroll, and that's the real big problem and a shame for the fans of the Miami Marlins.
Sadly, we'll close the proverbial book on the Marlins segment, and we're gonna move to a franchise which is in a very interesting place. The 3 and 6, sex. You see what I did there? Right there, I equate Oakland Raiders with fornication. Wow, that's so far the no curse rule that I did make a promise to myself today, and just when we eventually get this up on the YouTube channel, again, youtube.com/NPZ1978. The promise I made to make sure I was going to incorporate bleeps and things like that, I've held to. I haven't had to utter a curse yet, so I did make the reference, of course, to sex and the Oakland Raiders, which a Raider win is close, not quite, but it means a lot. Let's just put it to you like that. And so jumping off to this very, very, very weird point. So we move from Miami to another, I would imagine, unhappy fan base with promise, though. With promise. We move to the 3 and 6 Oakland Raiders coming off of, wait a minute. Hold on, Mike. I don't know if you're seeing this on the news feed right now, but I'm just getting word that I didn't know this was possible, but apparently the Baltimore Ravens just scored another touchdown. They're still scoring on the Raiders. Mike, are you seeing this on the TV? Do we even know how that score came from? What's going on out there?
Hey, Nick, it's funny because you got me, because I'm over here checking the news feed to see what it is you were talking about. But, you know, the Oakland Raiders, before the season started, were picked by a lot of pundits up at ESPN to win the AFC West. You know, the emergence of Carson Palmer last year and getting Hugh Jackson's offense. And with the young receivers that they had, Hayward Davis, you know, closing in on 1,000-yard receiving year last year, and how he progressed. Denarius Moore with his breakout rookie season, Jacoby Ford. Everyone talked about if Dan McFadden could just stay healthy and what he would give the Raiders, you know, potentially in that run game. And then, you know, they had the tight end, they had Kevin Boss, and they had a defense that's getting older, had some secondary issues already before the year started. But if they could just shore that up, you know, this team finished 8-8 last year and blew 3 fourth-quarter leads. One of them at home against the Lions, and it was a double-digit lead when they were up 27-13 a couple last year. They could have won the division easily. And even with all of that, finishing at 8-8, they still had a chance in their final game after Denver had lost to Kansas City 7-3 at home, the Tebow-led Broncos. They had a chance to win the division, and they lost to Phillip Rivers and their nemesis San Diego. So you fast forward to a year later with that organization, another organization of influx. But Mark Davis, Al Davis' son, has said he wants to bring stability to the Raiders. His first step was to hire a general manager. Now, the Raiders haven't had a general manager in a long time. Al Davis has always been final say of player personnel, as you and I both know very well, Nick. And he brought in Reggie McKenzie, a former linebacker with the Raiders back in the 80s, as the general manager. He was one of the heads of scouting for the Green Bay Packers and the organization that they built there. But people thought that's fine. But the coaching stability is where I disagreed with Reggie last year. Let go of Hugh Jackson, you know, after Hugh had been the offensive coordinator under Cable, head coach, they're back-to-back 8 years. I thought continuity was big for this team, not changing the offensive play calling and some of the terminology in the playbook, and just keeping that continuity together from a coaching perspective. You know, this organization that went through the Lane Kiffin, Art Shell for a year after they'd been fired 10 years previously, Tom Cable days, you know, let's get some stability, and you know, like Holmgren did with Eric Mangini in Cleveland. When he was hired as general manager, Mangini wasn't his choice, but he gave him a year to prove himself. And I felt that's where McKenzie made a little bit of a mistake. So you fast forward and they hired Dennis Allen, defensive coordinator from the Broncos, and the first thing Allen does before the season starts, 3 defensive starters cut. Stanford Reynolds, cornerback, now with the Chiefs. Cameron Wembley, the Raiders, the best pass rusher last year and leading sacker, and he's cut and goes to Jacksonville. DeMarcus Van Dyke, a corner who they drafted in the 3rd round from UM. Down here, my little stable down here, they cut him in the offseason. And now you fast forward to now, the same issues that were plaguing the Raiders are plaguing them on both sides of the ball. You know, the Raiders' defense is now not only older, with Seymour being older and Tommy Kelly being older, and you know, Seymour missed Sunday's game with an injury. He's been injured, played over a couple years, but the secondary, you know, has nobody of note. Sergio Hansen is a retread from the Eagle days. Pat Lee is another retread in this league. They have secondary issues, and it got exposed by Joe Flacco. And I think Dempster just caught another pass right now as we've been talking on the phone, Nick. And it showed up Sunday, and it was one of the most embarrassing losses I think that the Raiders have suffered. When you look at the Baltimore Ravens scoring the most points ever in franchise history on Sunday, it's just embarrassing, and there's just no way around it, and they got to regroup this week. But unfortunately, the hottest, and I'm using air quotes, team in the league, the New Orleans Saints, come to town and Super Bowl winning quarterback Drew Brees.
The NFL has always been fascinating, especially now because it's always about teams that are hot, and New Orleans coming in at 4-5 plays like a team that could easily be 6-3, could easily have won 7 games by now with the offense alone, which speaks to the way the NFL works right now, which is if you can put up 40 some odd points a game, you have a chance to win every game. And I think after the first couple of games, the Saints have finally are starting to show enough signs of life, especially after a big win against an previously unbeaten Atlanta Falcons team. Looking at, and this is just the Baltimore game I have to throw up there, and this just speaks to the absurdity of the league. if you look at Flacco's numbers, 21 for 33, 341 yards, 3 touchdowns, that's efficient. It's an incredible number. Only 33 passes for a total of 341 yards. So at 33 attempts, that's almost 10 yards a completion that he had. And you've got, again, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Carson Palmer goes 29 for 45. And Mike, the number 45 is what bothers me because I've seen too many teams that do this. If you look, for example, at passing stats, there's something just wrong with a league where you have quarterbacks who chuck the ball that many times in the game. And for example, if I'm looking at look at Oakland right now, Oakland's is 5th in the league in passing with 377 attempts, for a passing percentage of 61.3, which is not terrible, but you're looking at over 2,600 yards. And of course, New Orleans, number 2 in the league right now, 2,735 yards. Is a team that, with Carson Palmer quarterback, you still are looking at, again, 5th in the league in passing, obviously with a horrible defensive setting right now. But that's where the Raiders are. I think what's even sadder right now is if you look at rushing stats, which is, and this is the really sad part, is Oakland is 31st in the league. Mike, you probably know the numbers better than I do. Just by chance, how many yards do you think they've had? How many yards would you take a guess that they have run for total this season?
You mean complete rushing yards?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's been somewhere in the neighborhood of about 450 on the year, and Goodson's got about 111, so they could have rushed for more than 600 total as a team, through these first 9 games, which, when you break that down, that's almost an average of 50 yards rushing per game.
690. 690 yards in half a season. Meanwhile, San Francisco is at already 1,532 yards. That's incredible. That is...
Yeah, and then to piggyback on that, that's the thing. They're not rushing the ball this year like they had at the clip in previous years. And they're allowing 256 yards passing and double what they're rushing per game to the other team. So what that speaks to is you're not getting off. You're getting off the field on 3rd down. Carson and the offense takes a seat, and then the defense is out there for a long period of time. Last year the Raiders were one of the tops in rushing, number 2 in rushing overall in the NFL. I believe they were 8th in passing. And this year, you just look at it. They're 31st in rushing. There's one team that's worse than them in the league in rushing, and they have Darren McFadden, who's a perennial Pro Bowler, and he's got the talent of a Pro Bowler, but he hasn't been able to obviously, sustain any type of health in this league for consistency. The Raiders are 27th in 3rd down conversions, and that is a huge telling stat because in this league, if you can't convert on 3rd down and you're putting yourself, you can't rush the ball on 1st or 2nd down, you're putting yourself in 3rd and long in a passing offense where, there's been some injuries in the receiving corps. Jacoby Ford was lost for the year before the season even started with a leg injury. We also saw the concussion hit that Haywood Bay took in the game against Pittsburgh. So you're looking at that and you're saying to yourself, here are the Raiders on 3rd and long, and the chance of them getting it is not very good. And that just means that, the defense has to come back out and try to get the ball, and the Raiders are one of the fewest, one of the bottoms in the NFL in forcing turnovers, and they're 18th in total defense. So while they're middle of the pack, they're still not stopping anybody, and people are stopping them, and it's a telling stat, and I think Sunday's game was kind of the perfect storm because of the way Flacco and the passing offense could take advantage of the Raiders' secondary. The Raiders held Rice to only 35 yards rushing. And you tell me that before the game, you're thinking the Raiders will within at least a score at 10 points. And that just wasn't the case, And also, you look at what John Harbaugh, he's just a very good coach at Baltimore. He's taken in the playoffs every year that he's been there. He's won the division a couple times. And for him to go 2 fake field goal conversions, I mean, that's just the guts of a burglar. And he's a very good coach. With Dennis Allen, it's a little bit of a learning on the job here as he's going to be facing some the John Foxes of the world, guys who have been in this league have been to Super Bowls, and guys that make good halftime and in-game adjustments. And this is just going to be a learning curve for the Raiders when before the season we all thought, based off last year, that perhaps they could actually contend for the division title. And right now, 3-6, it doesn't look that way.
Yeah, coming in again, home for the 4-5 New Orleans Saints, second in the league in passing right now. The third down conversion part is, I think, is arguably most telling. Currently 32% in third down conversion, and your point about stability, I think I keep coming back to, is it's a new head coach, obviously first-year head coach, and clearly a different running scheme. There's a lot of talk of what the team is focusing on, which of course is a zone blocking scheme, and clearly there's something wrong because this major shift in this type of blocking is leading to 690 yards on the ground. So obviously going into New Orleans on Sunday is going to be painful at best. And in the last two games, you look at what Doug Martin as a rookie at Tampa did to the Raiders, almost coming in, I think is now fifth all-time in single game as a rookie, or a number of yards gained. So, and you have Doug Martin doing that 2 weeks ago to the Raiders rushing defense. And then last week you have the passing game the passing game for Baltimore carving up that secondary to the tune of 55 points. I can only shudder to think what Drew Brees and company are going to do. The only saving grace is, as a dome team, I automatically tend to think that track field mentality of the Saints is going to be slowed down a little bit by Oakland. And I tend to think that it could be I still think New Orleans is going to win fairly handily, but we're also talking about a quarterback in Carson Palmer who, again, fifth in the league right now. That offense, that passing offense, does put up a ton of yards. Palmer, of course, this weekend throwing for 368 yards and 2 touchdowns. Might well be a shootout, and New Orleans is not a team that likes to run the ball, although against Oakland's running defense, you may as well, anyone should run the ball. So, I don't know, but it definitely looks a lot like Oakland's going to be heading to 3-7, and possibly in a situation where they're going to try to win a couple more games, but they're not going to be getting to that 8-8 mark that they did for the last 2 seasons, which is very telling about the direction that the franchise is going. But with that stability with McKenzie, and regardless of how the season works out, hopefully keeping Dennis Allen for another season, unless it's just very obvious that he cannot control that team, which speaks to an attempt at maintaining some stability among that franchise. But Mike, let's go around the league for a little bit. Let's talk about some other things you were taking note of when we talked about the show during the week. We talked about looking at the league holistically and what things are kind of standing out there. So I'm gonna let you go first and just take me through some of your notes. What were you thinking about? What are you observing?
Well, some of the things that I wanted to talk about was the Coach of the Year league candidates. This season in the NFL, as everybody knows, there's been some good games, up and down games. You've had the tie from this past Sunday night with the Rams and 49ers, Sunday afternoon. The game went so late that it's probably still being played right now. And you had some of these good games throughout the year. The Tampa-Oakland game was a very good game. And by the way, Doug Martin is an Oakland native, which I didn't find out until later after the game, playing in front of a lot of family and friends. So good for him, bad for us. But the Coach of the Year candidates, are you looking around the league right now? Atlanta's sitting at 8-1. Mike Smith is doing it again. The Falcons are 4-0 at home. They've got plus 73 differential against teams, and they're outscoring a lot of teams. And their one loss is to a team that a lot of people before the year started. So it was a Super Bowl contender in New Orleans, and they lost to them by 3 on the road. So he's done a great job there. They're probably in line for another 12-win season at minimum. If you look at what Baltimore has done, losing Ray Lewis, some of the tragedy that happened with Torrey Smith and his brother passing away, some of the distractions that they've had. Ed Reed hasn't been fully healthy. Terrell Suggs was missing the first year of the season. And they're 7-2 and quietly leading division, 5-0 at home, and they play Pittsburgh coming up. So John Harbaugh's got to be in that conversation. And my dark horse candidate, and I stole this from somebody in the national media, but Schiano has done in Tampa Bay, and I said before the year started, I fully expected Tampa to compete in that division. They went out and signed Carl Nix from the New Orleans Saints. They got him to plug in on that offensive line to go along with Judah and Penn up front. They added Dallas Clark. They added Vincent Jackson in the passing game. The maturation of Josh Freeman is really why the Bucs right now are 5-4. They've got a favorable schedule. They put the Carolina next, who is one of the worst teams in the National Football League, and who they beat earlier in Week 1. And I just think Schiano has done a really good job. He had a really good draft. He's instilled confidence down there, and the team is really responding to the way he has gone about his business. And it also made a lot of general managers around the league look at the college coaches. And Chip Kelly's going to be the next big thing from Oregon, who a lot of people are going to interview for their vacancies that are coming up. And who are some of your candidates, Nick, that you would looking around the league this year? You know, we both talk every Sunday about some of the games we've seen. Who are some of your early coaching candidates?
I think Kubiak and Mike Smith come to mind because of, and Kubiak's a great story for me because the professional sports right now seems to be, and this is especially in light of the Mike Brown firing of the Lakers, it seems to be a just constantly in flux. Teams that do not do very well early on, everyone is so quick to hit the panic button, and suddenly teams start cutting coaches. You have these drastic changes in leadership. And the Houston Texans, to their credit, have gone through the 7-9 days, have gone through the 8-8 days, and have constantly been at the dance, but never quite allowed to get on the dance floor. Finally, this year they were able to, or last year they were able to get into the playoffs, and they're now being rewarded. I think Kubiak and that staff is being rewarded by seeing the maturation of their players. You know, you have a young Arian Foster, Matt Schaub, of course, coming from the Atlanta trade a few years back, Andre Johnson, who people can talk about Megatron all they want, Calvin Johnson, of course, from Detroit. Andre Johnson's still my favorite player. It's still my favorite receiver to watch in the league. Just a perfect textbook wide receiver that is just that model of every receiver you want. And of course, he is a alum of the University of Miami, so just a touchdown academy caliber talent. So I look at the two of them. The only issue I have with perhaps Mike Smith is I feel like we've been through this before. The Atlanta Falcons strike me as a team that they're almost similar to their compatriots in Atlanta, which of course are the Braves in baseball, where they're a dominant regular season team, partly because you have Carolina and previously Tampa Bay to beat up on, and New Orleans, who they've usually go 50-50 with throughout the season. And the NFC East seems to, or the South at least, always seems to draw a fairly decent schedule. They don't seem to get into too many challenging situations. This year, the NFC South gets, of course, to play the lowly AFC West. So Atlanta is a team that very quickly can notch 8-10 wins a season. I want to see something happen in the playoffs. Last year against the Giants on the road, Atlanta just was just torched. And it really reminded us of something that the Falcons have always seemed to be since Matt Ryan has been quarterback, which is great regular season, absolutely no presence or maturity in the playoffs. If the Falcons can at least get to the conference finals, I'm willing to listen to the argument about Mike Smith being a good coach. Unless that happens, and I will come back and say that this is a great regular season coach who just does not seem to be able to put it together in the postseason. That being said, I'm actually, and it sounds very funny, should the Minnesota Vikings get into the playoffs, I am going to vote heavily for Leslie Frazier. Just because when you talk about dark horse teams this season, the Vikings managed to have slipped under the radar for everyone this season, and they're still not a perfect team by any stretch of the imagination, but they play extremely well. They had a rough time this weekend against Detroit, managed to pull it out, but they're a team that I think surprised a lot of people, and if they manage to get to the playoffs, manage to win maybe even 10 games, I would have no problem awarding a Coach of the Year award to Leslie Frazier and that staff for basically helping to resurrect the franchise, which after that disaster, after having Brett Favre for that season, and then the year after and everything that had come from there, just a team that has come from really almost pretty much out of nowhere in that division where you had the Bears, Lions, and Packers, all perennial football, playoff favorites. suddenly the Vikings look like, I might say, at least the third best team in that division, and probably at least a fifth or sixth seed in the conference.
And it's funny to piggyback off that. The Vikings before the year, a lot of people were talking about Leslie Frazier. Would he lose his job? Like you just mentioned, in a tough division with the Packers and the Bears, and obviously the Lions who had already made the playoffs last season. So a lot of teams returning with a lot of experience in the postseason, and one of them just winning the Super Bowl just a couple years removed. So he's definitely, I would say, an early season favorite, especially that they're 6-4 right now. You go to the flip side, the flip side of the coin right there, and you talk about some teams that have sort of underachieved or some openings that may come up in the off season. And we're right around the halfway point where just a lot of teams have played their 10th game. The Giants are on a bye this week, so they're 6-4. So a lot of teams are in that 9-10 game stretch, and almost halfway through the season, you go and look at some of the standings, and St. Louis, they're under 500, but Jeff Fisher just got that job. He's not going anywhere. There's a couple of big jobs that are out there, and everyone's wondering what's going to be the story. The first one that comes to mind is Philadelphia. Is Andy Reid's tenure finally up in Philly? What happens to Michael Vick? But what happens to them down the stretch? They still play at the Cowboys coming up. They've had some tough games on their schedule. Can they right the ship? A lot of people say no. Will Nick Foles be the answer at quarterback? You look at Dallas. Jason Garrett, he's now in year 3, and still no playoffs. Still meddling by Jerry Jones. And they're under 500. And when is Tony Romo, Marcus Ware, when is that group going to finally turn the corner and make the playoffs and win a playoff game, which Cowboys fans all know the last time they won a playoff game? And you look at some other openings. Buffalo's intriguing to me. Every year the Bills are tapped by some pundit as a surprise team in the AFC because of the offensive weapons they have with Fred Jackson, with C.J. Spiller, Fitzpatrick being a heady quarterback. He's a little turnover prone his last couple of years. But everyone always points to Buffalo, and then they go out this offseason and sign Mario Williams. They have a good draft class on the defensive side. And here they are with Chan Gailey at 3-6, and it's still not producing in a watered-down AFC East where the New England has been beatable. They just lost to the Patriots, by a touchdown in New England. So that's an opening. Jacksonville is 1-8, and that's another opening. But who really wants to go to Jacksonville? The fan base does not turn out. The new owners already had problems with their best player, Maurice Jones-Drew. The drafting of Blaine Gabbert has not turned out the way fans thought when he came highly touted out of Missouri. And then the last one for me is, well, there's two more, but one is Kansas City, which we'll gloss over at 1-8 with Romeo Crennel. He's probably on his way out, and the regime changes is definitely going to take place there, even though the players do respect him. And Matt Castle is probably on his way out as well. But San Diego, to me, they're sitting there 4-5. They always start slow, finish fast. And what happens this year if they get stuck in reverse? And what happens if they don't live up to their potential and they continue to allow the points allowed? They've allowed 181 points this year. That's one of the tops at worst in the league. North Turner has always been on the hot seat. Philip Rivers is now the turnover-prone quarterback, where before he was the big decision-making quarterback. Antonio Gates is older. Ryan Matthews has not been healthy at all in his short tenure, drafted out of Fresno State, very high on him, and he has now lived up to the billing. They lost him to Jackson in the offseason. What happens with San Diego? Because that is a very intriguing job and always the center of attention for pundits when they're talking about dark horse teams in the AFC, not named New England, Baltimore, Pittsburgh.
It's the Turner issue is. I wonder a little bit about it because I think this is going to be the year San Diego is going to slip under 500. I think this is we're going to finally start to see that. It's a team that's window really has pretty much, I think at this point, basically closed up. Rivers is essentially maybe the only talented player left in that team. I think Gates is on the toward the later end of his career. And I think the bad throws and just the turnovers from that team are reflective of Rivers, of where Rivers is as a professional athlete, but also just that team as it is. And it's amazing because San Diego should have been to at least a couple of Super Bowls by now. When you think about it, for at least a 4 or 5 year stretch, you had the best running back in the league, you had a top 5 quarterback, and you had the best pass catching tight end in the league. You had offensive weapons up and down that field, and a solid enough defense that you should have won enough games. And just year over year over year, Tomlinson gets hurt. They come up short in the playoffs to New England, and now that window is essentially closing, and it's just not going to go anywhere positive at this point. I just don't see them being able to turn it up in going into December and then going forward from there. The Reed issue in Philadelphia is fascinating. One of the stats I saw this week I thought was really interesting was this is the first 5-game losing streak that the Eagles have had under Reed. And this goes back to 1998. This is the longest tenured coach in the league right now. And the falling out of where Vic is as a starter, and of course he's going to be replaced by Foles this weekend, and just where this team is heading, I'm still convinced that the Dream Team comment by Vince Young was the absolute kiss of death for that franchise. And it sounds so superstitious, but for all that promise from a couple years ago with all the free agents being signed, they have just looked terrible. And I don't know if that's because they foolishly let Luis Castillo, a offensive line coach, become the defensive coordinator. That how much time that took off that the player progression at that side of the field. Is it the case that the offensive line has just been woefully neglected, and we're seeing any quarterback at this point struggling, which is always my pet peeve about people that condemn Vic, because I don't think Peyton Manning or even Tom Brady is going to be that successful when your line is just caving in play after play after play. And I think the undoing of Reed is eventually going to be the fact that for the first time, maybe since Ricky Waters, they have a sensational running back in LaShawn McCoy, who is completely underutilized in a system by Andy Reid that is an outdated West Coast offense that simply just does not produce enough time of possession and forces any quarterback on that team to throw the ball way too many times. And going to the West Coast offense for a minute, even San Francisco has moved away. San Francisco is now a ball control, run-focused offense that's just with a high-powered defense that's just absolutely taking over their division, and it's going to be a solid team for many years to come. And it just seems like Philadelphia is just in the dinosaur age with the way they play football, especially when the passing game is being a stronger suit in the league, but Philadelphia just doesn't seem to be able to make that jump despite all of that talent. But I think the lack of an offensive line is just going to continue to do them in. And it's tough to read that team as far as where Reed's going to go. I feel like he's going to get a pass this season. I think the Castillo firing was just a way to capitulate a little bit. But I don't know if Reed is done just yet. But I think it's going to keep heading south. Heading north, however, and that being the Indianapolis Colts. Yeah, exactly. Well, you know what? It's funny. I went AFC North. I was going to talk about Indianapolis because geographically that is correct. But the Colts, oddly enough, are still in the AFC South since we, had redistrictization or something, whatever you want to call it in the league, since we've gotten the 4 divisions. But Indianapolis 6-3. Of course, it's a combination of Chuck Pagano / Bruce Arians, which if they happen to make the playoffs, you instantly give them the Coaches of the Year award, because that franchise was absolutely written off with letting Peyton Manning go. And they are currently, and this is the most shocking part, their record is identical to the Denver Broncos, and I believe this year Peyton Manning is coming back home to play the Colts this season. And it's extraordinary. I mean, both teams 6-3, and Indianapolis is only a game and a half outside, 2 games actually behind in the division. If the Colts make the playoffs, the discussion of Coach of the Year ends immediately, and you go to the hospital and you give the award to Chuck Pagano and to Bruce Arians in the locker room.
And it's been fun for Indianapolis. You look at their remaining schedule, and they've got a tough one, this Sunday against New England, but they've been it's almost like Peyton Manning didn't leave. The Colts are up there in the tops in the NFL in passing. They're 8th at over 278 per game. And they're rushing, which has always been on the Peyton, post Edgerrin James days, where Edgerrin James was a good complementary back and Joseph Adai. Those backs always, while they served their purpose, they weren't looked at as key facets. It was always Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison, and Reggie Wayne. So the fact that Andrew Luck has come in and they drafted Colby Fleener from Stanford, his tight end from Stanford, and he's helped out in the passing game. Donald Brown has been decent in the running game. He's been hurt a little bit for Vic Ballard has taken over some of those duties these past couple weeks. But it's really Andrew Luck, Reggie Wayne. And that's why they're 6-3. And it's funny because on the defensive side of the ball, they ranked 22 in total defense. So you're sitting here wondering how they do it. Well, before the year started, they beat Minnesota. They beat Green Bay at home. And they're winning their home games. They're 4 at home. And they still play Buffalo, Tennessee at home. And that should easily be 2 more wins if you're just going based off the numbers and the overall records. But Indianapolis, I agree with you. Coaches of the year would be the operative word, especially since Pagano probably won't come back this season. But it's a really good story if you're a sports writer, especially in the Indianapolis area. It's something that you can really run with, and this team is something that everyone's rallied around. And this is not to go back to the baseball point, but this is another one of the reasons why the Marlins had sold off a lot of players that have been telling people it didn't work when we spend a lot of money. Look what happens when we have young talent that will play harder. And here's a classic example in a different sport with shorter schedule. But, like you said, Indianapolis almost picked to finish last in that division, given, Tennessee coming back and how they played down the stretch last year. The Texans were runaway favorites to win the division. But Indianapolis was pegged to be right there with Jacksonville battling for, maybe one of the top 5 picks in the overall April draft coming up. And here they are at 6-3 and pretty much control their own destiny for a wild card spot.
I'm gonna leave. We actually hit the hour mark. But as and getting into final thoughts for a second, the one thing I leave off, the one thing I'm gonna start to wrap up with here on what seems to be the first episode of probably an ongoing series, obviously mostly about Raider talk, but the Miami thing had to come up today for obvious reasons. The last stat I'm going to bring up, or last series of stats, is talking about the Manning brothers. I think everyone knows, of course, who's listening, that I'm a huge fan of Peyton Manning, one of my favorite players that I can recall. When I really started following football in the early 90s with the 49ers, Peyton Manning is one of those players that just stood out. And I think what's happening in Denver speaks to something that I've always felt, and it sounds so comical, but I could take 10 people off the street in any country on earth, or 10 Martians, and if I give them Peyton Manning as their quarterback, pencil them in for 10 wins. There's something about the way he plays that position that just manages to bring the talent out of everyone. Now, granted, it's a Denver team that went 8-8 with arguably the worst quarterback in the NFL in Tim Tebow, and has managed to, at this point, go 6-3, probably will surpass the 8-win mark, will more than likely win that horrible division in the AFC West, and is going to set himself up to possibly get at least as far as the second round and maybe even the conference finals with a matchup against Tom Brady or Joe Flacco and the Baltimore Ravens. And if by some chance he gets to the Super Bowl, I would think that immediately the Manning Brady argument ends that day, because it says volumes of a player whose ability, coming off of a neck injury, to manage to go to another franchise after spending an entire career in one other place and just elevate that franchise to back to its Super Bowl glory, which was the last place they were when the current general manager of that team, or vice president of football operations, John Elway, took them. It speaks volume of this player. I got to run this down. Look. So, first off, in 5 games, Manning threw 3 touchdowns. 5 games in a row. And if you look at even the completion rates, 70.5, 80, 73.3, 77.1, 71.1 within the last few weeks. 3 touchdowns, It's 5 weeks in a row of 3 touchdowns. And in that span, actually, 5 weeks in a row of 3 touchdowns. Last weekend, only one in that close game against, not even close, the 36-14 win against Carolina. In that span, 16 touchdowns to only 3 interceptions. Folks, it is greatness we're talking about. It is Peyton Manning we're talking about. In comparison to his little brother, who, after winning the Super Bowl last year, was suddenly talked about with a second ring on his fingers, somehow being better than his older brother, has not thrown a touchdown since, I believe, yes, actually since before Halloween. So that is the collection of stats I am going to wrap up with today. Mike, what's the last bit of information about the league that you want to throw out there before we get this going in, well, next week, but we'll talk about schedules in a minute.
Well, I tell you what, and the Peyton Manning numbers that you made right there, just to quickly talk about that, this could be the first year where, the same guy could win Comeback Player of the Year and MVP in the National Football League, especially if the Broncos down the stretch, and like you said, the division is not very good. They still play, unfortunately, Oakland, and they still play San Diego and Kansas City twice. They could realistically get to 10 wins, and it would be monumental, given not only his injury and the fact that people talked about he may never play another down in the NFL before the season started to where he's at now. So, totally agree with that. My final thought is, and since the two of us share a common bond being Raiders fans, and we started with the Marlins because of the big sports story of the day, but the Raiders are the prevailing theme of this podcast, and my thought is Raiders fans, hang in there. I'm one of them that has been very upset that Hugh Jackson was not retained as coach, that didn't really know much about Dennis Allen, that we've talked off the air about Greg Knapp as the offensive coordinator and what he hasn't brought to the offensive table and the new schemes that they've implemented this year. But if you look at the Raiders' schedule, 4 of their next 5 are at home. They still play Cleveland, Kansas City, Carolina. There's a chance for this team to realistically finish 8-8, and in a year where they were rebuilding or weren't they rebuilding based off what happened last year. So there's a lot of football left to be played. Herm Edwards is saying you play to win the game, and I think for Raiders fans out there, if you're listening to this podcast, you're going to find out that we here are realistic. Jalen Rose always says, people lie, numbers don't. The Raiders are a constant offense, and if they can just get their defensive problems solved, and especially with this easy portion of the schedule coming up after these 2 weeks, because they play New Orleans and at Cincinnati, they still have a lot of home games, and there's still a lot of football left to be played against a lot of bad teams, and the Raiders could, obviously it'll only throw a little bit of water on the fire that is their defense and their secondary, but there's a realistic chance for this team to finish maybe 7-9, 8-8, and you get some of those draft picks next year where you can actually draft in the first, second, and third round and start to restock this team and give Dennis Allen a chance to maybe build this back up.
Scheduling note, folks, we've obviously just kicked off this podcast. Now, Mike, the next 2 weeks get really interesting because we're still going to be doing the show, but it's going to be under a very interesting banner because I'm going to be looking at the games almost purely statistically. This Sunday, of course, is my birthday. I'll be traveling. I'll be actually down in Pennsylvania with my fiance's family, and just constantly.
Happy early birthday to you.
Thank you, and nothing better will be, of course, a Raider win against the New Orleans Saints. So I'll be traveling, but I, of course, will be looking at stats. So I'm thinking if next Thursday we can get this going again and get this up and be able to get into it, it's going to be an interesting contrast because you'll be able to just put your eyes on the field and see what's going on, and I'll be looking at numerically to figure out what statistically is telling me where this team was going. And again, the two numbers I always look at, of course, are turnovers and third down conversion. Those are the two that almost always tell me the way a game goes for any team. The week after I will be leaving the country, I will be actually on the Mayan Riviera in Mexico, so I will have no ability to get in touch with a TV, well, maybe a TV set.
I don't think they've found out what phones are yet in Mexico.
I don't think they have. So I will just simply be basking in the sun and taking in all the sights. But again, maybe a stat-based breakdown sometime during the week. Mike, off the air, we're going to talk a little bit about schedules for next week. My hope is I think next Thursday should be good for us too. Now, as a recording note, of course, this is a podcast. This is not live. This is going to be put up on the web. I'm going to spend a little time editing just to clean up a little bit. Although, quite honestly, Mike sounded great. We did the sound test before, came out really well. There was really no craziness on the line. Even that nice little way to hold down the fort when Sprint didn't hold it down for us did not go so badly today. So we should be good to go to actually get this up pretty quickly. Errors and all, because speed is key in this business. So I will get this up on the air, and of course, people want to contact us, youtube.com/NPZ1978. Mike, let's leave it with your Twitter handle one last time.
Sure, that's at DAKIDLEON. Always inbox me any questions that you guys have, and love to take it. I'm looking forward to the podcast going up, and Nick, I'm looking forward to doing next Thursday is Thanksgiving, so let me wish you a happy.
Oh my goodness, that's Mike. Oh wow, that's right. It's next Thursday's gonna. Oh goodness. All right, so yeah, we're gonna be.
Yeah, it could be scheduling up, but like I said, sports does not stop even on Thanksgiving, as everybody knows in the NFL, especially with 3 games on the docket next Thursday. So, but we will definitely talk, and appreciate you having me on.
Mike, I'll talk to you off air. Take care, bud.